Two words that we don't often hear enough about, but they are baked into so many different areas of fatherhood, marriage, life, career, and that is generational trauma. Recently, just as recently as even last week, these two words kind of boiled up to the surface, not necessarily in my life, but as something of what I've actually been talking about here since the very beginning, and dealing with how we've learned to see the world and learning to see it differently. So many of the things that I see when I talk to different dads is identifying the patterns in their life that are subconsciously running that are not their own. Now, that showed up in my life with my transition out of the Marine Corps because I was running on a pattern that was issued to me by the government of said, this is how you leave the Marine Corps, this is how you find success, you should follow this path and everything works out. That was not my path. That might as well have been my dad telling me to go be a doctor because he was a doctor, or my dad giving me the ultimatum to be a farmer or else. That's not what life is about. Life is about discovering, life is about understanding and figuring out who you are, breaking the trauma, breaking the cycle of where we've been so we can really uncover who we are, but then really get excited about where we can go. Because generational trauma isn't necessarily just something that you have to ignore, to recognize, to figure out. Almost every dad that I've talked to and worked with in 2021 had these two words tied to their story. There was an event, a defining event, at some moment in their life between 0 and probably about 25. Those defining events created a memory, created a set of circumstances that then they began to run on autopilot, that they kind of removed permission from their life to be someone different, that they couldn't break free from the design of what that event gave them. And a lot of times those events can be tied to how our fathers talk to us, how our moms talk to us, whether maybe the absence of a mom or a dad in our life, or what I've also been thinking about and asking this question is, how did love show up in your life as a kid? Because in our lives, I can often equate, and I'm looking for when I hear someone talking, is how has love shown up either abundantly or been scarce? Because our human nature is wired to feel love, to desire and move towards love. And oftentimes when we run into the opposite, our brain learns that this desire is bad, that this desire for love moving forward is bad. And so what our brain does is it said the opposite must be true. I have to protect myself from this desire in order to survive. Because at the core of who you are and what your brain does really well is survive. Now, in the context of survival, what your brain learned to do in the context of love kind of dictates how you show up in relationships as an adult. Maybe you are very cold when it comes to talking to other people. Maybe you're very protected when it comes to your marriage. Maybe you're very protected when it comes to your friendships. Or maybe at work, you seek self-validation and love from the work that you do. You bury yourself in your work. You run towards your work. You are a high-performing A-type individual that is crushing it at work because maybe, just maybe, you didn't have the affirming behavior early on to really validate who you are and to really rewire that love that you're basically looking for. So what I want to do with today's episode is one, give you those two words, generational trauma, because those two words are something you can Google. You can Google generational trauma with X circumstances. You can Google books on Amazon for generational trauma. It's a research word. You can go into podcast players and type generational trauma. But oftentimes we don't have those two words to illuminate the issue. We don't have those two words to really understand maybe, just maybe, what's missing in our life so that way we can recognize it, learn to compensate and grow in that area instead of walking around it. Because subconsciously, so many times our brain just walks around objects without actually thinking about it. We've walked around these elephants in the room without actually being able to see them. And then once someone points it out, it's like, poof, that elephant becomes visible. And sometimes within personal growth, and this is why action is so important, because if you become a content zombie, everything that you do is just essentially building a herd of elephants in your life. And you're like, how do you move a bunch of elephants in your life? They're all massive. And then you really just have to pick one, keep working one by one until the herd is gone. But the problem is the elephants keep showing up because no matter how far you've grown, there's always new elephants that are coming up in your life. But the idea here is making sure you understand where generational trauma played a part in your life, where that might illuminate some paths for you to go towards, or maybe, just maybe, this idea of generational trauma maybe allows you to understand why you've resonated with this podcast for so long, because I too was missing those two words. Because what I've also done this week is double down on that. And reframing what I do is helping dads grow through generational trauma, redefine the parameters for living, and create a lasting legacy of change. Within generational trauma, there is a phrase that says, the cycle stops with me. Whether that be a cycle of bad marriages, whether it be a cycle of fatherless homes, whatever the cycle that's on repeat that generationally has been happening, the cycle ends with me. And so what I'm helping dads do is break through the trauma, recognize it, grow through it, find purpose in it, redefine what living can look like on the other side of breaking that trauma pattern and getting back to living and creating a strong legacy that your kids now understand what living looks like, to be free of the generational trauma that maybe has plagued your family the entire time that you didn't know, and creating something that creates an entire new branch on the family tree that redefines your last name forever. If this episode really hit you in the gut, and you want to have a conversation about maybe talking about some generational trauma in your life and where it's showing up that you can't yet figure out, head on over to benkilloy.com. There is a free coaching call there waiting for you to get clarity on what that could be, and more importantly, where you could go if that generational trauma was left behind. Guys, have an amazing week, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.